Hello, everyone. Welcome to paragraph 2 in episode 6 of the stories of Abram. We're in Genesis 16. In the previous paragraph, Sarah suggested to Abram that they have a child through a surrogate. Surely that was awkward, but it was within the customs of the day. Today's text is going to give us the chance to practice on roots that lose a letter. So unlike most days where we handle the verb forms as we come to them in the text, I just pulled all of these out and put them in a chart below, and we'll go over this phenomenon of roots losing a letter all up front. So we start with vaitikach, and let's work through the steps. What's at the end? There's nothing. What's at the beginning? We see vav, patak, dagesh, so preterite, or vayiktol, and the dagesh is in a tav, so that has to be the prefix. So that would mean it's either 2ms or 3fs. Well, if we run up to the context, we see vaitikach Sarai. Sarai is feminine. This is a narrative, so it's third feminine singular, not 2ms, but we're missing a root letter. We only see a kof and a chet. So what's the issue for this particular one? Right, we've had something assimilate as a dagesh forte in the kof, and it is not a noon, it is a lamed. The root is lakak. So on the side, whenever we see kof followed by chet, we should think lakak because over 99% of the time it is. But this lamed is a little schizophrenic. It thinks it's a first noon, so whenever it is over a silent shavah closing a syllable, it becomes a dagesh forte in the next letter, just like a noon would. Our next form is leshevet. What's going on with leshevet? At the end we have tav, at the front we have lamed. That lamed is a preposition. So we have a preposition on an infinitive construct which has added a tav at the end. What kinds of roots drop their first radical and add tav at the end in order to make their infinitive construct? Two kinds, mainly, first noon verbs and first yod verbs, plus a couple of copycats. So our main contenders would be nashav, which is not a root that we are familiar with, and then yashav, which should be a root that we are familiar with. So this is from yashav. If it had been a lakak, we would have seen the same thing because lakak thinks it's a first noon. We would have dropped the lamed and added a tav and had kachat. Similarly, halak, the hay on halak is a little schizophrenic. It thinks it's a first yod. It would drop the hay. It would have a tav at the end, and we would have leket for the infinitive construct. And this is also kal. What about our next one? Vaititain. Nothing at the end, the preterite marker at the front, the tav is the prefix, so again 2ms or 3fs in theory, but in this context obviously third feminine singular, and we are missing a root letter. And yeah, this is pretty straightforward. It's from natan, a verb that we're really well familiar with, the first noon in the kal imperfect or prefix paradigms. It sits over top of silent shavah closing the syllable, and so the noon has jumped into the second root letter tav as a dagesh forte. Next we have vayavo, and there's nothing at the end. Again, it's preterite. The dagesh is in a yod. That's our prefix, so that's a third masculine singular. We've sort of lost R2 and sort of haven't. R2 is a vav, a cholam vav in the lexical form, bo. And here we don't have the vav, but we still have the vowel there. So, we've built this by taking the infinitive construct and then adding prefix on the front of it. Now, we don't have the normal Cal ID badge. What happened here? Well, when we dropped R2 as a consonant or turned it into a vowel, the first radical had to go and lead that syllable. And so that opened up the normal ID badge that we have on the front. So R1 is no longer joined to the prefix. The prefix now is going to have a pretonic open long syllable. And because bo is a fientive or a dynamic verb, that goes back to an historical form that had an A-class vowel, yak-tul. And so when we open that up, that original patak, as it were, lengthens to a kamate. So we have vayavo. If we had had a stative, like if we had had bosh, then we would have had a tsere there, because the statives go back to a historical form yik tal. So there's an E-class vowel there that gets lengthened when R2 drops out. Okay, so vayavo was from bo, and then what about vatahar, or vatahar, sorry. We're missing something again. We see the preterite marker at the front, we see the tav for the 3fs, and then we only have a hey and a resh. Our options when we're missing a letter are to add a noon, usually at first position, add a vav or yod somewhere, which means yod on the front, or vav or yod in the middle, or an R3, an original R3 yod would be a hey on the end in the lexical form. That's what this one is. The root is hara. And again, we have a 3fs. And is this one cal or not cal? We've got a patak under the prefix that looks a little bit like a hifil, but it's not a hifil. It's been affected by the fact that the first guttural, or the first root letter, sorry, is a guttural. The next one is vatera. Again, there's no ending. We have the preterite vav patak dagesh on the front. The tav is the 3fs, and the tav is sitting over top of a tsere. So let's think about these verbs that can have, or that have the prefix over a tsere. What are our main options? Well, whenever we have an E-class vowel under the prefix, our main options are that it is either cal or nifal. When it's nifal, we're looking for kamates underneath the first radical, or something A-class at the very least, or on occasion that A-class vowel will have mutated and become a cholam if R2 was vav. But we're down here looking at the prefix over a tsere, and the first radical is not a guttural, so that puts us in line for the cal. And so we've either got a first yod, we have a geminate root, or we have perhaps a third yod, which is preterite or jussive, because that has moved the accent up and it has affected the vowel under the prefix. And this also happens with nata and with bosh. Bosh is a reminder for the state of roots. So with those options in mind, when we see a resh and an aleph, we're usually thinking either yareh or ra'ah. And in theory, it could be either. In particular, though, yareh would have kept the yod there. We would have had a chirik yod. And so this is actually from ra'ah. And the third radical, which is a phony hey in appearance anyway, has been dropped because we have moved the accent up. We have a short form, we call it. The next one is harata. And at the end, we have kametz hey. And then what about that tav? Is that an ending? Is that a radical? Or what gives with that? Well, we already had a form of this verb. We have hara again, which ends in a phony final third hey, originally a yod. And when we make a third feminine singular and we have to add a kametz hey to that, it's like it's doubly marked as feminine, because first we get a tav, and that holds the kametz hey for the normal 3fs ending. That also distinguishes it from the 3ms form, which would have a kametz hey because the hey's there pretending to be a root letter rather than being a perfect verb ending. So here we have a cal perfect 3fs from hara. And why is it not ha-rata with a vocal shava under the resh? This is a pausal form. I left the accent on this one on purpose, just as a reminder that when we get a pausal form, that vocal shava under R2 can become a full vowel, and typically it will be a long vowel. And then finally we have vaitekal. And again, we have nothing at the end, a preterite marker at the front. The tav is for 3fs. And the prefix is over at tsere. So just the same structure that we had here with vatera. In this case, it was a final hey. This one is not a final hey. What other options might we be considering? Now, if you remember the chart, it could have been a first yod verb like a yakal or something, but it can also be a geminate. And so this is not a common vocabulary root for us to know, but we might recognize it because we know our verb stems. Kal comes from this root. And the reason that we have the Sarai here instead of a kametz like we did with vayavo is because this is a stative root. So now we've parsed all the verbs, so we can just move through the text pretty quickly at this point, we hope. So we have Vaitekach Sarai Eshet Avram et Hagar Hamitzrit Shifchata. So Sarai, the wife of Abram, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her servant. So her Egyptian servant would be smoother English. And we mentioned last time that, we are having the explicit referent for the subject mentioned. It's not just working with the pronoun. And so this is one of the things that's marking this off as a paragraph. Then we get a parenthetical remark about time. So we have Mikates. Kates, I can't remember whether that's in your common vocabulary for a first-year grammar, but it means the end. So from, better in English, at the end of Eser Shanim. Eser is, how many is Eser? Eser is 10. And then Shanim is from Shana, which is year, and we use the plural form up through 10. So Eser Shanim, 10 years. So this is after 10 years, Leshevet, Yeshav, to dwell, of Abram dwelling in the land of Canaan. So we can see why Sarai would be getting impatient, discouraged, etc., and it has brought her to such an extreme position as asking her husband to go and have a child with another woman, although legally it could be recognized as Sarai's child. Then we have Vaitetain otach le'Avram isha lo le'isha. So she gave her, remember the et for the preposition is a geminate root, and it would have ita if it had meant with her, but the et, which tells us the direct object, becomes ot with a pronominal suffix. So she gave her to Abram isha, kametz he with a mapik, her husband. And then we have a couple of lameds on these words, to him, to wife. And in that kind of construction, it's like in order to be. So she gave her to Abram, her husband, to become his wife, or to be a wife for him. So this is an elevation in status for Hagar. Then we have Vayavo el Hagar. He came to Hagar, or he approached Hagar. Again, this is a euphemism for an activity that follows. Sometimes commentators say that this is a pretty explicit reference to that activity that follows. So I thought I would just pull up a quick search that would show otherwise, because we often, when we have those kinds of questions, we want to look for evidence. So here I did a search for bo followed by el, because those two work together to come to, and then also shakav, because that is known to be another metaphor or euphemism. And when we look at the verses that come up here, first we have Potiphar's wife making this false accusation against Joseph. And first she says that he came, right? Ba Eli, he came to me for the purpose of lying with me. So bo el, at least in this passage, cannot refer to an activity that did not actually happen. It's approach and then lay with. And then we have a couple verses in 2 Samuel where we have Bathsheba and David, and in one we have a 3FS subject, right? So she came to him. Again, it's a picture of the approach, although it's insinuating things. And then we have Shakav which is another metaphor. And then we also can have it 3ms. He approached her and he lay with her. So either one of those, shakav on its own or bo and el on its own, can be a euphemism. But they are exactly that. They are euphemisms. They work by metonymy. They are not explicit descriptions. A couple years ago, when the Net Bible was gearing up to go from its first edition to its second edition, they had a change of opinion on what to do with these kinds of passages. Normally, the Net Bible takes metaphorical passages and makes them really plain in English, and they had done that with all of these sorts of passages. But the decision was made, there's metaphors in the Hebrew, maybe we should use metaphors in English. And I ended up with the task of going through all of these Hebrew metaphors and finding equivalent or near equivalent English metaphors for them. So if you go and look up the Net Bible, second edition at bible.org, you can sometimes find in the notes discussions of how those metaphors are working. Anyway, so back here in chapter 16, he approached Hagar, Vatahar, and she got pregnant, Vaitera, and she saw, but it's a thinking kind of saw, so she realized, ki harata, that she was pregnant. And then Vatekal gevirta be'eneha. So once she realizes that she's pregnant, which was something that her mistress was never able to do, she becomes proud in her eyes, and Sarai is belittled in her eyes. And so there's different ways we might try and say that in English. Her mistress was disparaged in her point of view. I guess modern English can still say something like in her eyes, but it's not something in your eye, it's an opinion. So again, it's another type of metaphor where one thing stands for another. So this is building the tension in the passage. It was Sarai's idea to use a surrogate, and then it's just really awkward to think about how this unfolds in history. Is she hoping that Abram's going to say, okay, yeah, I'll do that? Or is she hoping that he will say, no way, right? Let's have faith. God's going to do this with just you and me. But he gives in to her request, and then what is she hoping? That once and done, that because that just would make her look all the more insufficient, perhaps, because she's been trying to have a child for so long and hasn't been able to. So is she really hoping that this happens just one night and she's pregnant and it's all taken care of? Or is she sort of hoping that there's going to be trouble with him having a child with Hagar as well, which would mean a lot of repeated attempts? It's just weird and awkward, and there's a lot of tension building. And so to see where that goes, we will have to come back for the next paragraph.